reading for the day is Genesis 18, verses 1 through 15, the Message. God appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent. It was the hottest part of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing. He ran from his tent to greet them and bowed before them. He said, "Master, if it please you, stop for a while with your servant. I'll get some water so you can wash your feet. Rest under the tree. I'll get some food to refresh you on your way, since your travels have brought you across my path." They said, "Certainly, go ahead." Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. He said, "Hurry, get 3 cups of our best flour, knead it, and make bread." Then Abraham ran to the cattle pen and picked out a nice plump calf and gave it to the servant, who lost no time getting it ready. Then he got curds and milk, brought them with the calf that had been roasted, set the meal before the men, and stood there under the tree while they ate. The men said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" He said, "In the tent." One of them said, "I'm coming back about this time next year. When I arrive, your wife Sarah will have a son." Sarah was listening at the tent opening just behind the man. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old by this time, very old. Sarah was far past the age for having babies. Sarah laughed within herself. "An old woman like me get pregnant with this old man of a husband?" God said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Me have a baby, an old woman like me? Is there anything too hard for God?' I'll be back with this time next year, and Sarah will have a baby." Sarah lied. She said, "I didn't laugh," because she was afraid. But he said, "Yes, you did. You laughed." That's it.
You never know. You never know. One of the joys of the narrative lectionary is that we get to dig into some of the stories that we've heard but haven't really studied. And this story of Abraham and Sarah is one that is a very interesting and, I must tell you, complex story. So I want to review that story a little bit. Abraham is considered the ancestor of a whole bunch of people. God told him, "Abraham, I am going to make you the head of generations of nations." So Abraham and Sarah, and their names at that time were Abram and Sarai, lived in Ur, clear down over at the bottom there on the right, at the end of the Fertile Crescent, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers both run, in what's now Iraq. And for some reason, Abram's father, Terah, decided that they needed to move. So there seems to be a westward migration. This was about 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years before Christ. So they moved to Haran, way up at the top there, and settled there for a while. And it was here that Abram heard God's voice come to him and say, "Abram, I have a place where you need to go. It's a land that I promised you." And at that point, changed their names to Abraham and Sarah. And they got up and went down into what is modern-day Israel or Palestine, into a place called Shechem, which is not far from Jerusalem. And they were living there for a while and getting along pretty well. And then there was a famine. So this part isn't shown on this map, but they went down into Egypt because there was a famine. And there was a kind of a Moses-like story that happened there. Sarah was evidently quite beautiful, and the Pharaoh liked her, so took her to his house, and she says, "I don't like this." And Abraham came and got her, and they went back to the land of Canaan. Now, there was a whole lot that happened in between all of this, but that's kind of the outline of the story. And it was when they were back in Canaan that this amazing thing happened. It's interesting to look at the lineage of Abraham. He was the son of Terah, along with several other children. And there's some suspicion that Sarah was actually his half-sister. We don't know that for sure. You can see the question mark on the line. We saw this in our Bible study lesson, and we thought, well, that can't be right. But It is. So Sarah and Abraham had lived together forever, and she was unable to bear children. And of course, remember, in that culture, not having children was a big deal. So Sarah said to Abraham, I want you to go to my servant Hagar, an Egyptian woman, and be with her, and she can give you a son. Well, Hagar did give him a son, and then things got weird between Sarah and Hagar. And Sarah eventually said to Abraham, you need to tell her to leave. So she did. And Sarah's son, Ishmael, is at the head of what we now call Islam. They became an Arab nation and eventually became the nation of Islam. Sarah was, in this episode with the visitors, was told she was going to be pregnant, and she laughed and said, yeah, right. And said that that's not possible, I'm so old. But guess what? She got pregnant, and she had a son, Isaac. Then there's a whole other bunch of stories around Isaac, some of which are pretty problematic to us. We're not going to talk about those today. But we're going to talk about that possibility that Sarah laughed at. She said, you know, this can't happen. And the stranger said, is anything too great for God? Be open to this possibility. And lo and behold, Sarah did have a son, Isaac. Now, this story, we don't know for sure these were actual living historical people. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about what would this story be if they weren't historical people? Why this story? For me, one of the important things about this is it shows we all kind of come from the same place. That we're all connected somehow. And these days, when Christians and Jews and Muslims get together, they often identify themselves as descendants of Abraham. We're Abraham's family. And it's the thing that brings us together. I think that's really important, one thing that this story can do. I'm not sure that was the intent when it was put together, but for today, this possibility that Sarah totally denied, I'm old, I'm barren, I'm not going to have a child, and all of a sudden she did. It was an amazing kind of a thing. Well, you know, every week as I think about what's coming up for Sunday, I try to be open to things that come my way. And Friday, I watched the film Wild, which is based on a true story written by Cheryl Strayed. And Cheryl Strayed was a mess. She lived a life of drug abuse and was very close to her mother who died, and she felt completely empty when her mother died, and decided that if she walked the Pacific Crest Trail, 1,000 miles from almost the Mexican border clear up to Northern California, she could find herself. And indeed, that's what happened. And it's only because she understood the possibility that existed for her to change her life. And if you haven't seen this movie, it's an excellent movie. Or read the book, too. Cheryl Strayed evidently lives in Portland now. This is where she wound up at the end of her journey. And it's an amazing story of a struggle of a person through physical extension that I can't even imagine walking that distance, that she was able to find herself again, to find who she really is. Along toward the end of the movie, they kept showing quotes, and this was one that really puzzled me. We are never prepared for what we expect, by James Michener. And I thought, wait a minute, we're never prepared for what we don't expect. No, he says, we're never prepared for what we expect. And it made me think about this whole idea of possibility. And as we see with Sarah, pregnancy, that idea that something's growing and something's going to come eventually. And I think Michener hit the nail on the head that even when we're expecting something, we're not prepared when it actually arrives. So it's the journey that brings us to that place. It's the being open to the possibilities that come to us along the way. I like this. I love the smell of possibility in the morning. And for me, it is coffee. It's the possibility of waking up. But what a great idea. That hymn, morning by morning, new mercies I see, great is your faithfulness, gives that idea that there's always something new if we just can open our eyes and ears and hearts and minds and grab hold. Sometimes we have to hang on for dear life. And that's what Cheryl Strait did. There were times in her journey when she was sitting at the top of the hill and her boot slipped out of her hand and went all the way down this hill. She was so angry she threw the other boot after her. And she made shoes out of what she had. Duct tape figured prominently in that one. And walked miles on these homemade shoes she made. When you're open to the possibilities, even when you think there's nothing left, there is something. There is something. I like this concept too, that if we dwell in possibility, if that's the place we live, then we can work our way through most anything. And we get all these great surprises along the way, just as Sarah did when she became pregnant. Robert loves to surf the internet, and he found this clip that I'm going to share with you that so embodies the sense of possibility and being open to what can come to you. This is a group called Only Boys Allowed, which is a group of essentially teenagers that had nothing to do. They lived in the valleys in southern Wales, which used to be coal mining areas, and now the mines are all shutting down, so they don't have anything to do. So someone thought, let's have them sing and see what happens. And the joy on the faces of these young men as they sing proves the fact that there is a possibility if we can be open to it. Now, of course, I spent time in Wales on my sabbatical, so we're going to hear this song in Welsh. It's called Colaman, and it essentially says this: I don't ask for a luxurious life, the world's gold or its fine pearls. I ask for a happy heart, an honest heart, a pure heart. A pure heart full of goodness is fairer than the pretty lily. None but a pure heart can sing. Sing in the day and sing in the night.